Good evening, listeners. Welcome to the Phantom Myth, where we look for mundane answers to so-called paranormal events. My name is Priscilla Phantom, and I'm here to put your mind at ease. There are no demons, no ghosts, or ghouls. This evening, we have a letter from Mason Amber, a young man living on this island, where he speaks about a dream he had, and usually I wouldn't even consider investigating a dream, but the circumstances around this one are disturbing, to say the least. You may have heard of this young man in the news. He has recently confessed to the murder of his own parents. Now, to the remaining family of Mason Amber, or the friends of his parents, Rose and Richard Amber, you may want to miss this episode, as you may find it quite disturbing. Hello, Miss Priscilla Phantom. I know you'll read this letter. I have a strong suspicion that it'll be the one to make it to your little show on Tuesday night. My story is far too interesting to have it scribbled in a case file and hidden away in a box somewhere, which is why I'm writing to you. This is no cry or a plea for your help. This is a confession. I am not remorseful, as I no longer have capacity for such things. I simply want to tell my story for all to judge. I read somewhere that your mind is designed to keep you alive, not to keep you happy. I wasn't unwell, mentally or physically, but I wasn't happy. I don't think I knew that I wasn't happy. I never stopped to think about it. Happiness is an abstract concept, forever on the horizon. I was never one to put much mirth in feelings. I seldom used my heart nor my soul, but my brain. My mind was my only weapon, and maybe that just made me vulnerable. A person needs a feeling. They need love and space and, well, happiness. They even need some vulnerability. I never thought about what I needed. I had what I had, and I would keep going forever, if necessary. But isn't that what we all do? Trapped in our little boxes and our little lives, trying to convince ourselves that we are, indeed, happy. Well, I am free, truly free of it all. One night, as I closed my eyes, I had a dream. Not the normal dreams we have every night. Not the kind of dream where you go to school or suddenly you're naked in front of everybody and they all laugh at you. No, I dreamt of something real, intangible and beyond understanding, but more real than the waking world. The lives we've built ourselves or things we believe in. Some may call my dream a nightmare, and I guess that's what I thought it was at the time. But my mind was so small and I was so stupid. I pity my past self for how insignificant I once was. I had finished a shift at work and I was exhausted. I knew I had to be up early in the morning. However, I always found it difficult to drift into sleep. This night was different. As soon as my head hit the pillow, I was somewhere else. I found myself in a room with crumbling grey walls and mud underfoot. Plants had weaved their way through the cracks in the roof and died there. The dried carcasses of them remained hanging limp against the grey walls. I reached up and picked a leaf off. It came away easily and I studied it, turning it over in my hand, and I eventually crushed it in my fist. It crunched in a way that dead plants do, and I opened my hand and all that was left was brown dust. I let out a breath, and I could see it curl away and dissipate into the ether. I had never felt cold in a dream before. There was a window in one of the walls, the glass of which had been broken and only a few sharp shards remained. Beyond the window, I could see nothing, as if it were night, except even at night there were stars or street lights, lights on in other houses, or the illumination from the moon. Rarely was the world so utterly dark, as if beyond the window a black curtain hung to fool me into believing it was night. Gingerly, I reached out my hand between the shards of glass. The air felt still and stale. I kept reaching further and further, sure that at any moment my fingertips would glaze against something, some fabric or a stone wall, or perhaps something soft like putty. I took a step forward, my entire arm now sticking out through the window, and I felt nothing. But I could barely see my fingertips anymore in this smothering darkness. Something wrapped around my forearm. It felt damp and soft, and I cried out and withdrew before it could fully take hold. I stumbled back into the room, surprised at how quickly I freed myself. I studied my arm, and there was not a mark on it. Whatever that thing was, it wanted me to get free. I turned around. Behind me stood a door. It was wooden, and it had been scarred with some large gouges from a knife or a claw. I was not certain. Beyond was a hall, and at the end of this hall was a door. It was white plastic, and it had been dented and cracked and smeared with what I hoped was mud. It was an awful shape, but it looked familiar. It looked like the front door of my childhood home. I turned back and realised the room I was in was roughly the size of our dining room, where my mother and father and sister and I would sit on Sundays and eat our roast dinners. I always thought the room was a waste of space. We only ever used it on Sundays, or if we had company. The rest of the time we would sit on the sofa, cross-legged, and eat our meals, whilst watching some murder mystery my mother had got her way, or the news if my father got to choose. The hallway seemed longer than it used to, maybe because it was empty of all our shoes littering the floor or our hanging coats on their hooks. In place of my childhood memories were rubble and marks on the walls and loose wires hanging down where there once was recess lighting. I wandered forward, brushing a hand against the wall as passed. The plaster was cold and uneven. I stopped as I reached the front door and turned back to look upon what was once my home. It no longer felt as such, and I had no desire to corrupt my childhood memories any further with exploration of this crumbling shadow. As I reached for the door handle, I noticed a small white note stuck to it. The paper was perfectly clean and had not been folded or torn. This had not been marred by whatever storm of violence or madness that the rest of the house had been subjected to. Something had been written on it in a large looping font. It read, "One look and you will forget. Be warned." I didn't know what exactly to make of this, so I placed the note in the pocket of my pyjama bottoms and opened the door. My vision went dark. I blinked to be certain my eyes were not closed. I heard something laughing at me. My heart jolted inside its cage, frantic. A light, a smouldering ember, burnt at the fringes of my vision, and the image began to fade from my eyes. My vision was hazy, but I found I could see. My heart leapt in my chest and my breathing faltered, and I found I could not move. I had seen his face, but where the memory of it should be was a charred scar in my mind. I blinked and blinked again. A black scorch hung in the centre of my vision. I blinked a few more times until it had disappeared completely. I was not outside or even by the door I had just opened. Instead, I had found myself standing in the dining room. I glanced around and it looked just the same as it had done just a moment ago. I needed to get out of this place. This was not my home. I turned and swung the door open into the hall and sauntered forward toward the front door, eager for this to all be over with. As I reached for the door handle, I found myself unsurprised by the presence of a second note stuck neatly to it. I plucked it off and held it in my hands. This one was much the same as the last, except the message read, "2 looks and you will go mad. Be careful." I placed the note in my pocket to find that the first was not there within it. I closed my eyes and opened the door and stepped through. My foot did not land upon the doormat we had when I was a child, not mud nor concrete. My foot did not find anything solid whatsoever, and I fell. Down and down. I couldn't tell you how long I fell. Years that went by in seconds, and seconds that took years to fall through. I felt nothing. Not warm nor cold, not scared or happy. I opened my eyes and I was not surprised to find nothing. A black, endless nothing. The darkness was close, wrapping around me, snug, cradling me as I sank further and further away from myself. I could almost hear a laugh. Someone, something was laughing. Not an unkind laugh. My eyes began to adjust and I realised the darkness itself squirmed and writhed before me, endlessly curling in upon itself. Around me unfurling a million tentacles and a billion teeth pointed like sharp daggers. And then it opened its eyes. all of its eyes, and I was once again standing in the dining room. I laughed. My life was so small against this thing, this monster that basked in the nothing and swam in the brief moments of existence. Nonetheless, I was where I was, and I might as well do whatever it is that I was supposed to do. I turned and opened the door into the hall. I could see the presence of a third note. I wandered into the hall, but I didn't go to the door. Instead, I turned right and made my way into the kitchen. The floor beneath me was covered with mud and plants that had grown between the cracks in this room as well, I noticed. The worktops were dented and smeared with something dark, and the cupboard door had been ripped off altogether. I laughed. It hardly mattered. Through the window I could see the abyss, and I smiled at the teeth and the eyes and the creature that I knew lurked outside. I was scared, but what was fear worth? I'd made my way into the living room, or rather what used to be the living room. There was not a single piece of furniture in the house, it seemed. There was a large bay window in this room. There did not seem to be a shard of glass left in the frame. This room looked much the same as the dining room, and I saw no importance of staying here, so I turned and wandered back to the hall. Between the door to the kitchen and the door to the dining room was another door. I opened it. I knew it would reveal stairs. I ascended those stairs before me and found myself on the landing. And there were 4 doors before me. The bathroom, my parents' room, my sister's room, and my own. I opened the bathroom door first, and I closed it almost immediately. I'm not going to go into detail for you, Priscilla, but rest assured it was disgusting. I opened my sister's old room next. The room was hollow. It looked so big with nothing inside. There was a hole in the roof where plants had grown in, seeking shelter, and died here. Between the leaves I could see the same empty blackness as outside the windows. Chips of paint flaked off the walls, and the carpet under my feet had been worn in places. I could make out the underlay beneath it. I turned back and walked out to the landing, closing the door behind me as I left. I looked in my room and found it exactly the same state as my sister's. The only room I hadn't seen was my parents'. I didn't want to look inside. I think I knew it would set me free, and I think that scared me. Instead, I searched the house again and again. I spent hours in that house, staring at the walls until they began to move. I laughed at them. Walls aren't supposed to move. I spent days in that house, watching the dead plants hanging down until they began to grow longer and longer. And I laughed at them. Dead plants aren't supposed to grow. I spent years in that house, peering into the darkness out of the window, until I was sure I could see it twisting and distorting and going on forever and ever. I laughed at the dark. It wasn't supposed to twist like that, was it? Something inside me snapped, and I ran upstairs and flung open the door to my parents' room. This room looked much like mine and my sister's, except here I was certain the walls moved. I crept over, and beneath the smooth, filmy surface, the walls buzzed with movement, with life. I peered closer and closer, until my face was pressed up so close to the plaster. There were worlds in the walls of my house. In the fabric of realities, I was nothing and seeing everything. I giggled like a child in a hall of mirrors. But what I saw was not a cheap fairground distortion, but a living, thriving world pressed into the surface. What is, what was, what will be, what could be, and what could now never be were in every particle. I ran my fingers gently over the wallpaper, and I saw that I was what I was meant to be, where I was meant to be. I only need do one more thing. Between me and oblivion stood a door, and I only needed to walk through it to find my home and my freedom from the world and all that tethered me. I resigned myself to my fate and ran down the stairs towards the front door. I tore the last note from the handle, and I smiled as I read it. It said exactly what I knew it would say. 3 looks, and you will not wake. Be mine. I screeched with laughter as I yanked down the handle and stared into the oblivion. I leaned forward and allowed myself to topple over the edge, willing. Upon my descent, I never stopped laughing. I was home. And then the darkness began to singe in my peripheral, and I found I was no longer falling. I swallowed my heart, and I felt it tumble through my body into its cage in my chest, where it continued to hammer against its prison. The darkness faded from my eyes, leaving faint spots in the centre of my vision, and realised I was looking at a lamp sitting on a bedside cabinet. I recognised this lamp and this cabinet, but the lampshade didn't look faded in the same places they had a short while before, and the grain of the wood didn't match the grain of the wood of my cabinet. I was in bed, in a home that was not my home. I wasn't awake, and I wasn't asleep. I laughed again, because this world was not my world. I did not wake in the world I had gone to sleep in. This world, though it feels real, is naught but a dream. I killed them with my own 2 hands. I did it, as far as the police are concerned. At the time, I felt like I had no choice, but we all have a choice in everything we do. I guess you can say the devil made me do it. Wow. This has been Mason Amber's account of the events leading up to the murders of his parents. Well, if Mason happens to be pleading not guilty on the grounds of insanity, I think this letter might be a very strong argument. I would like to mention that the original letter was sent to the police, and this is just a copy. It was likely just a dream, but I do think it shows Mason's frame of mind during the period of time, and I really do hope he gets the help that he needs. It doesn't seem like anything supernatural has happened here, but I do feel better knowing that he is in jail and not on the streets. In related news, Beatrix hasn't been sighted for quite a while, and the police don't seem to have apprehended her as of yet. I really do hope they do soon. Out of the dark, monsters lurk, but those monsters are human, and we will prevail. Sleep well, dear listeners.
The voice of Priscilla Phantom is Lyndsey Evans. This podcast was written, produced and edited by Sasha K Williams. Thank you for listening to our podcast, The Phantom Myth. Hope you enjoyed it. Oh, and just a friendly reminder that if you see your reflection blink, run. Have a satisfactory day.